I'm going to be talking to Professor Stewart Prest, who's in the political science department at the University of British Columbia, about the politics around the very, very unusual meeting that happened on Tuesday, where Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth called in the American military leaders, 800 of them, and basically read them the Riot Act and re-engineered how America it treats its military forces in one meeting. So, welcome to the interview, Stewart.
Thanks, Markham. Good to be here.
I This is such a momentous occurrence that I'm not sure that I can even sum it up properly. Give me your take on it.
I see this as another in a systematic series of attacks on all of the, if you like, democratic guardrails in the American political system. So these are institutions that are not necessarily specifically related to the conduct of elections, but they're rather institutions that insulate the state from a takeover from the center and prevent this kind of totalization of power that we clearly see Donald Trump pursuing.
Um, Last week, I interviewed Professor Kristen van de Biesenbos of the Western School of Law in San Diego, and she talked about constitutional guardrails. And I think everybody assumed that when Donald Trump became president in January, he would push against those guardrails. And her argument was, will the guardrails hold? And I think that this meeting with between Hegseth and the military brass showed that they are either broken, bent, or being pushed on really hard by the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think we can look at this, and there's been a lot of almost frame by frame analysis of the speech to try to figure out what was the temperature in the room, what were the generals thinking and doing, and so there out of that analysis, some people are driving hopeful signs that this is a guardrail under pressure but not buckling, and so the specific nature of this guardrail is worth laying out. It's the idea that a military is under democratic control, but subject to a whole series of professional norms of behavior and some law regarding the deployment of military that prevent or constrain its use against civilians, either domestically in the United States or abroad. And so the real nub of the speech is effectively Pete Hegseth saying to the military, these rules should no longer apply. The purpose of the military is to attack and kill and to defend the order that we, the civilian oversight, say needs to be defended at any cost. And that includes, as Donald Trump put it, targeting the enemy within the United States, that is deploying the military against citizens in the United States. And the military leaders did not seem warm to that idea in their reaction, but that's the tension now.
Yeah, that seems to be out of all of the contentious points that Hegseth made in his speech, that's the one that really stands out and as a major break with tradition. And particularly because Donald Trump has been accused over and over of using the powers of his office to punish his enemies. And now you've got the military, which is the ultimate weapon of, means of punishment.
Oh, that's right. It is effectively saying the purpose of the military is to do what the president says, or the Secretary of Defense that is being relabeled the Secretary of War. So again, trying to rename, relabel things to serve the political agenda of this particular administration, not building institutions for the long term. And the wording it sometimes might be a little obscure, saying we're not going to be constrained by the rules of engagement. That's essentially saying we're not going to do things like make sure we're targeting enemy combatants, other militaries in our attacks. We're not going to verify those sorts of things. We're not going to adhere to the laws of war effectively, because the rules of engagement embody the global humanitarian law that all countries have agreed to. And we've seen breaches of that before, but it's basically saying it no longer applies in the view of this administration. So now it's up to the military leaders to decide how to respond to that. And that's why this is a guardrail, because there's not an automatic conveyor belt there, but now we see pressure, and we do have to wait and see how the military responds to the administration. And that's a scary statement in any context, much less the most powerful military in the world.
Well, and particularly when combined with something that Hegseth said, he said, we're going to a warrior culture, a warrior ethos, and we're going to we're no longer going to have woke culture within the army. When the Secretary of Defense starts talking about a warrior culture, I would imagine that citizens ought to get nervous.
Absolutely. I think this is signaling, in many ways, a continuation of themes we have heard from those in the Trump orbit for some time. But it's a selective celebration of a certain kind of masculinity, of a certain kind of culture associated with the manosphere, as it's sometimes called. This idea that people need to be a certain kind of tough and even violent to maintain the political order that this particular community is interested in, and no one else has a right to stand and to advocate for something different, because now the rubber is hitting the road, and we are willing to use force to implement this vision. That's the clear subtext here, and it's not even that sub. It's pretty out front.
Stewart, you are one of the most sober, level-headed academics that I interview. You don't get excited very often, but you're being fairly, for you, this is fairly critical. Much of criticism for these. So I'm going to ask you a loaded question. Are we seeing parallels to what Trump is doing today to what Hitler and the Nazis did in the 1930s? Because this is a favorite, right? Everybody wants, that's the standard. So what's your take on that?
I think we can draw parallels for sure. And that's not to say it's going to follow the same script, but celebrating a particular kind of warrior ethos, that's the fascist approach. Celebrating a certain way of being a citizen and discounting other ways of being, saying that some people are part of this view of society and others are undesirables, and we're going to do what it takes to purify society, to remove these unwanted immigrants from our society. That is also fascist. These are fascist themes, and so we should be able to label them as such when we see them. That doesn't mean the United States is identical to Nazi Germany, but it does mean, I think, at a minimum, that we see people pursuing this kind of selective vision of society, this exclusionary vision of society, and there is at the same time a willingness to try to centralize power in a kind of populist way around the leader, and whatever the leader says is law, and any of the other institutions that are dedicated to constraining that leader, whether it's the power of Congress to exercise the power of the purse. We see that under assault. The courts to restrain the president or to interpret the Constitution. We have seen a progressive politicization of the court, and it does seem willing to more or less sign off on anything this administration does, and then attacking different elements of the the society outside of government as well, whether it's universities, media, the legal profession, on and on down the line. And now we see the military itself as a sort of middle space between civilians and the state. It is part of government, has its own set of rules. That too is under pressure. So everywhere we see a constant pressure to try to force people to fall in line with the whims of this presidency. So it is that scary.
One of the differences between other forms of fascism, like in Europe in the 1930s would be a good example. Um, it seems that this time in the United States, citizens are responding. We're seeing plenty of marches and protests and people taking to the street to, make let the president know how unhappy they are. Professor Van de Biesbos said that Trump is deeply, deeply unpopular in many parts
Hmm.
of the country. Is that a difference than what we've seen in the rise of fascist governments before?
Yeah, we want to highlight these differences as well. The United States is a rugged, robust, maddening, but also very durable democracy. Most people in the United States think democracy is the right way to govern, and we can see resistance to attempts to try to push those rules and the norms that those rules depend upon. When we see them being pushed to the side, we see counter pressure, we see protest. Indeed, we have a great deal of research suggesting that protests during the early months of the Trump 2.0 presidency are greater in number in the performance that we're seeing than even during the first Trump presidency. We are not always seeing reporting on that to capture that, but it's there. There is resistance. Moments like the attempt to try to sanction, penalize a talk show host, Jimmy Kimmel, creating a huge outcry, and some of that coming from citizens, some of it coming from corporate actors, some of it coming from even economic investors and so on. So there is a backbone there, if you like. There is a source of resistance, and so I expect that to continue, and I expect politics in the United States to be highly contested, more contested than we have previously seen. But we can have the sense of the scale of the danger, but without saying that's obviously where we're going to go.
Stuart, without gazing into your crystal ball too much, what sort of things should my viewers watch over the next little while? What should they be really be paying attention to?
It's a good question, and I think there is a danger of watching too closely, if you like. Partly it's just a matter of your own emotional health. If you're constantly watching news that is unsettling, it can sap the joy out of life, and it can lead to an unduly negative perception if all you're seeing is the bad news, and that's normally what's being reported. So taking a measured approach to monitoring what's happening in places like the United States and elsewhere is a good idea. But looking at these longer term trends and looking for moments when we see a push against a democratic norm or a democratic institution, or people exercising a right to freedom of speech and so on, and then looking at the response. Those are the moments that we need to pay attention to, because each one of those is a test of a guardrail, and we see, does it hold, or does it bend, or does it break completely?
I have to say, Stuart, you've got me questioning my mental health.
I try to tell my students to follow the news, but I tell them not to follow it too closely for exactly that reason. So doing things to maintain our mental wellness is I think part of the formula here.
Well, I'm going to go for a bike ride today. Anyway, thank you very
Excellent.
much for this. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Take care.